Hello everybody, welcome again back to the workshop. If you're a fan of my channel, you've seen me use this mini table saw sled, and it's got a few shortcomings. This particular runner, certain times of the year, it tends to lift a little bit. So if I need a really precise cut, it's not completely flat. This corner is actually hanging a little bit behind. So somehow when I glued this together, even though these blocks are 90 degrees, this face did not come out perpendicular to the table saw table. Wish this was a little bit bigger, because there have been a number of times I've been trying to cut pieces somewhere around this large, and I just wish I had a little bit more capacity out here. I have this particular piece of 3/4 inch plywood. I think if I rip it in half, I'll have two layers that are going to be about as high as this existing piece, and that will give me an opportunity to embed this bar to act as a runner, to put a couple extension wings on it. And finally, a while ago I bought this T-track, and I think I might try to take advantage of that. I purchased this zero center ruler a while ago, and it makes it relatively easy to find the exact center of something without doing tricky measurements. And I want to rip this in half. This is supposed to be 500 thousandths. I have a dado stack in there. I'm measuring a little less than that, somewhere around 492. And I'd rather sneak up on it. And even though I was measuring the slot to be a little too narrow, it's actually a little sloppier than I'd like, but that's okay. So in theory, I should be setting this right at 1/4 of an inch. So for some reason, my test pieces seem to be a perfect fit, but these plywood pieces, for some reason, are coming out too tight. So the easiest thing to do would be to shift the fence on my table saw a few thousandths of an inch, and I have a dial caliper clamped on a board to my table saw so that I can keep track, and I will loosen it. Well, it took me about 15 passes raising the blade and shifting the fence, where I think I've got both of these operating nice and smoothly. I had this scrap piece of poplar that I took the time to mill a channel to accept the T-track, and I just used the same dado stack to make that. I had to shift it to get it a little bit wider, and that fits very nicely on top of what's going to be the fence. This is the bottom of the fence. I have it opened like a book, and this is where I'm planning on having the table saw line up, and the blade of the table saw can tip this way, so I drew two 45-degree lines to give me an idea of where future cuts at 45 degrees might come into the new sled. And I've decided I'm going to cheat it this way a little bit, that as I tip the blade, I could hit the steel runner that's on this side of the blade. I have to be mindful of that. So although I'm gaining a couple inches over here, I'm actually losing an inch of extension, because even my regular table saw blade tipped to 45 degrees, it could encroach about an inch in that direction. So I think I'm going to cut the steel to be an inch shy on this side of the blade. And I could possibly run the risk, if I put my 10-inch blade into the table saw and tip it 45 degrees and I don't pull the steel out of the way, the blade could hit the upper runner. That wouldn't be so hot for the blade. So I'll have to just be mindful of that going forward. But I don't want to give up too much capacity since I'm taking the time to do all this work. I think I'm going to need two 9.5-inch pieces over here and two maybe 8-inch pieces over here. Before I glue it up, I'm going to put a couple coats of shellac in these areas. The steel is going to be running back and forth in the channels, just to seal them up a little bit, reduce some friction. Polyurethane would probably be better, and I do have some, but I think the shellac will dry quicker. Actually, I just realized a little too late I shouldn't get the shellac on these last areas, because this is where I'm going to try to glue the steel into the wood. And to speed up the drying, I have a hairdryer. Okay, I waxed the steel and the insides of the channels, and they're sliding very easily. And as I fold it together, just hold it with my hands. This side, they seem nice and tight. I'm pleased with that. Somehow, this side, however, there's a fair amount of play. Okay, here's the moment of truth. I'll glue this together. Gotta be very careful not to let any of the glue seep into the channels where the steel is. Gonna clamp it to my table saw. Definite flat surface. And I have this level here just to make sure it stays straight in this direction. And there we have it. Okay, I just declamped it, and these two are loose. These two are not moving. See if I can there you go. The bottom came out very flat, the top not so much. There's a little bit, piece is sitting a little proud of this one. It's a lot better. Well, I've made yet another mistake. I glued this up, and the glue up came out really well. Unfortunately, in my shop I had a bunch of these thumb screws with associated blind nuts to go with them. These are 1024s, which I think are a perfect size, and the idea, of course, was to glue them on the inside so that they would sit something like that, and when you put pressure on the screw, the nut would be pushing against the inside of the wall, and it would never come out. But it's kind of too late, so after thinking about it, I thought of a couple ideas. I could cut this in half, delaminate it, and put these in the way I intended. Then I'd have to cut perfect strips and laminate it all back up again, and that's a lot of work. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply mount these on the surface, and they're big enough. I think I'll be able to sink them in with a couple screws. So I was test fitting the channel, and I couldn't quite get it to sit deep enough, and I discovered that the dado I routed wasn't quite so perfect. Fortunately, I have a router plane which I set up to be the correct depth, and I can use that to shave the bottom of the groove. Alright, and that seems to fit. I glued these in with epoxy, and I have some short number 4 screws on 2 of them, holding it down, give it a little more anchoring, and there I have it on that end. Just a piece of quarter sawn white oak here. I cut this piece of wood, and I've been very carefully taking shavings from it, and my goal is to get it to fit in this track, and I think that works really nice. That's a good tight fit. So I laid this out to cut a knob. First thing I'm going to do is drill 4 perimeter circles, and then I'll go in and I'll cut out the knob itself. Well, here it is, more or less finished. Here's the stop block. Tightens down good and snug, and you loosen it up and it slides very nicely. Tighten it down again. As I commented earlier, when this is snug down, there is a little bit of play in here, and I wish that was closer to 0, but we'll see how well that works out. Somehow there seems to be a gap between these 3 pieces. Not quite sure how that happened. They were all ripped at the same time, glued at the same time. That joint doesn't look so perfect, but up here the joint looked really tight, but somehow. On the back side, I've got the screws that hold this. These extend nicely, they slide smoothly, and when you lock one of them in, that's pretty good. You can lock both of them in. Loosen them up, slide it in, tighten them down again, and over here on this side we've got more of the same. So I looked around my shop and I found this piece of red oak. Looks very straight grained, and down here you can see the rings are running almost straight up and down, making a quarter sawn, and I think this would make a great runner. It's a little bit wide for my table saw, so I think, imagine this is a runner. Ideally you'd want to cut a piece out of the bottom about yay big, and I'm thinking I could get 2, maybe 3 runners out of this, and it's plenty long. using my thin strip ripping jig set to 3/8 of an inch. And I have a video on how I made that if you're interested in viewing it. So this end over here fits in, and this end up here fits in, but it starts to bind, I don't know, about that far back to remove from the face from about here to here. And my number 7 is probably my best shot keeping things flat. Okay, it took a couple shots, but this is fitting just about perfect. I have a shiny spot that runs from about here to here. It tends to be on this side more so than this side. So I'm just gonna try to finesse it with this plane, and that's sliding pretty well. I'm sure with a little wax and a little wear and tear that's going to loosen up, so that's a victory. So I've never seen anybody put together a sled the way I'm thinking, so I thought I'd take a minute and explain my logic. The advantage of having an open sled like this is any piece can fit in it. You don't have a cleat at the far end tying the sled together. The other advantage is there's no floor, so you get the full height of the blade. The problem is, as you cut into these lower pieces, you dramatically weaken this fence here. So what I'm thinking of doing is assembling a sled something like this. I'm going to glue a couple standoffs on the runners, and I'll have a piece here to protect in case the blade comes through. And then I'm going to have a piece sit on top of those 3, and then 2 more pieces back here to protect any blade coming through, and the fence itself will sit about right here. I'm going to screw the fence that I just made to this block of wood, and as the blade comes through, most of it's going to be consumed in the thickness of the new fence. Some of it will come through to this piece, but it will still allow a good amount of good solid white oak here to support the whole thing, and of course the top of this fence will stay intact. First thing I'm going to do is glue these standoffs to the runners. Okay, it's only been a minute or so. Just want to get it tacked up till I can get a clamp on it. Okay, I've glued this piece to the lower pieces, and I'm just letting the glue set up a little bit before I get more clamps on it, and I've done my best to have plenty of squares around to make sure that this face is square to the table saw. I inherited this cheap bit set, and it does come with these countersink bits, and I don't really care if I toast these. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to screw channel in. And I took a shaving or 2 off the bottom of the 2 extension wings because they don't have to hit the surface of the table saw. So I carefully marked out where the sled was going to land, where the wood was, and I glued on specific blocks of wood to give me an area to screw to. I wanted 4 screws on either side of the saw blade. I have a bunch of these, I think they're number 8 2-inch long wood screws, and they fit good and snug, and that should hold quite well. I also took the time to round over these edges so that it slides a little easier in the track, especially where there are discontinuities. I found this joint here was a little sloppy, and when I screwed the screw in, these 2 tracks didn't line up very well. So what I ended up doing was gluing a couple pieces of paper inside that little area just to bring it forward a little bit. When I finally got this all together, I realized somehow when I had glued the runners to the body, to the carriage of the sled, I didn't get it 90 degrees. So I had to break the 2 runners off of the body and re-glue them, this time making sure that this face is perpendicular to the miter slots. So here's a view from the back side. You have these thumb screws here. Typically just a 1/4 turn is all you need to lock them in place. Okay, it took a little fine-tuning with a scraper blade, but this is riding really nicely in the 2 slots, ready to make another cut. And as I line that up, that's pretty gosh darn square. Well, I'm really happy with the way this came out. It is a little bit heavier and more significant than I envisioned it would be in the beginning. Ironically, as I hold this is more what I kind of like. Sometimes you just want to make a quick cut, and this is really the type of sled that I'd be looking for. For other cuts that are bigger, I typically go to my small sled, which has its uses, and it seems as though this mini sled that I made is kind of between the two. So time will tell. And to the left of the fence, I have a crosscut capacity of about 16.25 inches, so really happy about that. And to the right of the fence, it's about 11.5 inches, and that's not too shabby. So I have significantly more capacity than the old mini sled or even my small table saw sled. Well, that's all I got for this one. Appreciate you coming by the shop and spending a few minutes with me. Hopefully you got something out of the video. If you do, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. And as I like to say, stay safe, take care, keep your eyes out for the next one. And thanks for coming by.